Hello, everybody. Welcome to Economics with the Honorable David M. Walker, the former Comptroller General of the United States. I'm Dick Palavita. I'll be your moderator for today's show. And today we have a very exciting show because we're going to look at the Doge report, which for the people in the United States know it's the Department of Government Efficiency. And the thing is, the latest rumor, see, it's really hard because they flash things back and forth. The latest rumor is 100,000 jobs were lost. Okay. The latest rumor is 200 billion was saved. And then you get some other rumors that they're going to refund, they're going to give taxpayers 5,000. Maybe it's 2,000, maybe it's zero. And so what you have is complete, utter chaos in Washington, D.C. So the thing is, the information is horrible to figure out. The information is scant at best. The media distorts as it comes in. So we have the Doge report. So we're going to bring in the Honorable David M. Walker, the former Comptroller General of the United States, who's going to attempt to make sense out of senselessness that exists in Washington, D.C. So, David, this is a tough topic because I get reports all the time and they're conflicting. Some of them say, hey, the economy is collapsing. And then I look at the economy's not collapsing. I mean, the stock market went down, it went back up again. Egg prices are all-time high. No, egg prices went down. So it's almost like you're getting agenda-driven media, and it's hard to get the truth. So tell us what is actually going on in the Tower of Power of Washington, D.C.
Well, thank you, Nick. It's good to be with you. Let me kind of talk about a few things that have happened this past week, and then I'll go into Doge. First, this is the first day that many federal workers have to return to work in person. So therefore, I expect that traffic in Washington, D.C. was a lot worse this morning than it was last week. And they're having to come back to work in person in installments over the next several weeks. So we'll see what happens there. But since our last show, the big thing that's happened, from an economic and fiscal standpoint is the Senate and the House passed what's called the continuing resolution, which basically funds the U.S. federal government through September 30, 2025. And basically, it had less than a 1% increase in discretionary spending. It had somewhat more of a reallocation to defense rather than non-defense. But, while it's a somewhat less than 1% increase, that's less than otherwise would have been the case if they actually done all the appropriations, because obviously that doesn't allow for cost of living increases, whether it be with regard to wages or whether it be with regard to anything else. So now the real issue is what's going to happen to the budget reconciliation bills and what's going to happen to the budget for fiscal 2026. That process needs to get started now. The president needs to propose a budget through his Office of Management and Budget. If it's like it's been for the last 20 plus years, we won't get anything done before the beginning of the fiscal year, and we'll have to end up, looking at some type of an omnibus again. So we'll see. But with regard to Doge, there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation. One of the things that's interesting to do, I find, is to go on to Grok. Grok is the AI element of X. And I went on to Grok and I asked Grok, how much has Doge saved? And of course, it changes when more information becomes available. But, the information that I've seen is that Doge has alleged that it saved about $115 billion. And yet, there's only been, evidence for about $5 billion. It turns out that a lot of the contracts that they, have canceled, had either already been performed or had been partially performed. So you've got to pay for that partial performance. In addition, even if you end up coming up with something that you cancel, since Congress provides an appropriation that is both a ceiling and a floor, you can't cut spending unless Congress agrees to cut spending. You can free up the money to be able to spend it on something else, but you can't cut the spending. because you're supposed to spend your appropriation, which makes no sense at all. And that's something that needs to be reformed. It's one of the reasons you have people going out at the end of the fiscal year, spending money on a bunch of things that, quite frankly, we don't need, but they're supposed to use their appropriation. The only way that they can assuredly cut spending this year and prospectively is through hiring freezes and through layoffs or reductions in force, so-called RIFs, if you will. And there have been different numbers claimed with regard to that. And there are lots of litigation going on with regard to their ability to unilaterally dismiss, persons that are on probation. And so the it's going to take a while for the dust to settle. But I come back to where I started. Doge is not doing an audit. Doge is doing a tactical review of information systems using artificial intelligence to identify possible or probable fraud, waste, abuse, or mismanagement. And to the extent that it identifies something, most of it is falling in the category of waste or mismanagement rather than fraud or illegal activity. And as I said before, in order to actually save the money, Congress has got to agree to rescind the funding. And they're going to try to get that done through a budget reconciliation package. Whether or not they'll be able to do that or not, time will tell. And it does look like that they're going to end up having two packages this year because the Senate wants two, the House wants one. By the way, with regard to the House package, it ends up saving money as compared to current law over the next 2 years. Big footnote, but it costs more money than saving money as compared to current policy. I apologize, and I'll explain the difference. But it costs more money as compared to current law. The big difference is under current law, all the tax cuts are supposed to expire at the end of this year. Under current policy, it assumes that they won't expire. But the bottom line is that we still have a huge structural deficit problem, mounting deficits, debt, if you will. At best, Doge is going to make a modest down payment on our fiscal imbalance. We really need to engage in a much more strategic, fundamental review and reassessment of what the government's doing as compared to the Constitution, what the departments and agencies are doing as compared to their statutory charter. What are they trying to accomplish? How do they measure success? How are they doing based upon that? Using all the different tools of government, which is spending, guarantees, regulations, enforcement power, tax preferences, etc. And so we can separate the wheat from the chaff between what are the things that, quite frankly, ought to be devolved to states, what are the things that ought to be privatized, what are the things that ought to be consolidated, what are the things that ought to be eliminated. That's a much more strategic, thoughtful process that is going to take a considerable amount of time. Hopefully that will be engaged in as phase 2 after Doge, and that will require legislation. And so one of the concerns that I have about Doge is, as I've said many times, they need to be more targeted, they need to be more transparent, and they need to be more truthful with regard to what they're doing and what they're finding. And what's happening is that while they're clearly finding some things that are shocking and inappropriate, and that steps need to be taken to try to minimize that in the future, and they're clearly employing some practices that the accountability community, by that I mean the inspectors general, the external auditors, the GAO, et cetera, ought to be using on a prospective basis with regard to its work. Okay. The simple fact of the matter is that in order to make the big changes happen, it's going to require legislation. It's going to require bipartisan support in Congress. The approach that's being taken now actually serves to divide the parties more apart rather than bring them together. And furthermore, the approach that's taking right now is serving to further undercut public trust and confidence in government, which obviously is a matter of concern because it's already very low. If anything, we need to try to improve it rather than to cause it to go down even further. So those are just a few opening remarks. I look forward to hearing from you and Sasha and Mark, Kim, and Rick, our resident genius, on these and other topics.
Yeah. It's very interesting because something that you pointed out, I think, David, which is very important, is only Congress can cut spending.
Right.
And this goes into the recent Supreme Court decision 5-4, which is interesting that we're actually 4 against. But Alito was very upset that they forced the government to spend $2 billion, which he didn't think they had or should have spent because the executive order rescinded the funds going to aid. But I think the decision was correct, and so did our lawyers on the Lawyers Den show, because these contracts, were already fulfilled. In other words, you owed the money. What are you going to do? Not pay the money? In other words, if you're not going to lose, you're going to lose it. But the other bigger problem, the macro problem, which they don't seem to get, is only Congress can cut spending. In other words, you can put all the executive orders you want, but Congress needs to step to the plate here. And if they don't work together with Congress, they're not going to get anywhere. They're just really spinning their wheels.
Well, let's come back to that because that's a very good example, Nick. Okay, on that particular case, my understanding is the same as yours, is that the contractor had already performed all the services. And if the contractor's performed all the services, you've got to pay them. Okay.
Yeah. Right.
Secondly, let's assume the contractor had not performed the services. All right. Then you have to determine whether there's a termination clause and whether there's any penalties associated with that, if you will. But assuming that even if there are penalties, that there's still a potential amount that could be saved, that just means you're freeing up money to spend on something else. It doesn't mean you can cut spending because Congress has to be able to approve a rescission in order to actually cut spending. And again, our current budget and appropriation system is an abomination. It needs fundamental reforms, but that's the way that it is under current law.
Yeah. Well, we're going to bring our panel from around the world. We have Sasha Starr beaming in from Canada. We have Mark Lee from the Raleigh-Durham area. We also have Jacoby McDuffie from Raleigh, and we also have Rick Rosner from the Los Angeles area. And apparently Mark has a question.
And don't forget a question and everything, just really quickly.
Green on today. Kim's got her green on today.
Yeah.
Oh, goodness. So it was my husband's shirt. He passed away 2021, St. Patrick's. So my friends are going to take me out tonight. We're going to celebrate his life. So
sounds wonderful. And I got to go get me some green on before I go to work and everything. But my question for you, because y'all were talking about what Congress can do and can't do, and all along those lines are supposed to do. But I was always under the understanding, and you've got more background than I do, that when it comes to military spending and the military actions, that it was supposed to be approved by Congress. But then we just recently have a strike on Yemen against the terrorists, the Houthis, and everything along those lines and everything of that space. So I'm wondering, what are we doing about defense spending? Because that's what I've always been under the understanding that that's one of our biggest budget items in terms of are we doing enough cutting, and he have gone and got this approved and all along those lines. So like I said, you would know more than I would, but I did see that he had launched that strike earlier, I think today, and everything. And there have been some casualties already. And he said today he's going to be raining hell on the Houthis and all along those lines. So just your take on that.
Well, several things. One, Congress has the power of the purse. And so Congress determines how much money is going to be allocated for various federal programs. The Defense Department, is the largest category of discretionary spending. But keep in mind, discretionary spending is only 26% of total direct spending. Most of the spending is so-called mandatory spending, which is Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and a number of other programs, if you will. Defense is over $800 billion. With regard to the continuing resolution, there was a slight increase in defense, more of an increase in billion-dollar terms for defense than for non-defense, a very modest increase for non-defense. There's a difference between how much money you have and what do you do with the money. The president, as commander-in-chief, has the authority to use military force in the interest of the United States interest. And as you know, the Houthis have attacked not only commercial shipping, they've also attacked our Navy,
Yes.
on a number of occasions. So he's clearly has the authority to do that, okay, absent some action by the Congress to the contrary. The Congress is the only body that has the authority to declare war. The problem is that they haven't declared war since World War II.
Right.
And yet there have been plenty of conflicts since World War II. And typically what they do is they'll end up, passing some authorization to use force that gives the president, authority to be able to commit U.S. troops to hostile action, if you will. So, he's within his authority to do what he's doing, and we'll see where it goes from here. As you know, Iran's the one that's really behind all of this. I mean, but for Iran, the Hamas, the Houthis, and Hezbollah wouldn't have the resources that they need in order to be able to do what they're doing. And it's only a matter of time, I think, before there's some type of action against Iran if it doesn't end up coming to the table. And that action could end up being on its oil production capabilities and or its nuclear facilities. Obviously, it'd be better if we could resolve it diplomatically, but so far there's not been an interest on behalf of Iran to engage in those activities. Hopefully that'll change.
Yeah.
So your ex-boss, David, Bill Clinton, very smart guy, except when it comes to sex. He governed from the center. He would look, I guess, at internal polling and see why he was unpopular, and then he changed his policies, often drastically, in like halfway through his first term as president, and left with huge popularity because he listened to people. And then our current guy governs by division. Last night, like at 2 a.m. or some crazy time, he announced that he was nullifying all of Biden's pardons because Biden was senile and didn't even know who he was pardoning. And that's just crazily divisive and doesn't get us to any kind of center.
Yeah, well, first, you're correct that Bill Clinton appointed me as Comptroller General of the United States. And I was, honored that he did that and very pleased. But I didn't work for him because the GAO is in the legislative branch. And in fact, the GAO and the Comptroller General has to be independent for the president. So I was part of the Reagan administration. I was appointed by Reagan for a presidential appointment. I was part of the Bush administration. I was appointed a presidential appointment during Bush 41. I was appointed by Clinton, and I served during Clinton and Bush 43. But I served as Comptroller General, which is independent from the executive branch, if you will. You are correct that I think that Bill Clinton, other than his personal problems, was a very good president. He was the last fiscally responsible president. He was center left. He worked on a bipartisan basis to get things done. He had to work on a bipartisan basis once the Republicans took the House. And as you know, Newt Gingrich was Speaker at that time. They had something called the Contract for America, which largely came, quite frankly, from H. Ross Perot's work, if you will. And, Bill Clinton took on welfare. He said, took on and engaged in welfare reform. We haven't had a fiscally responsible president since Bill Clinton, and we desperately need one. There's a big difference between policies and personalities and style of leading. I think, one of the reasons that Trump won was because people preferred his policies, and he actually spoke to policies, if you will. But I can also tell you that I think a significant majority of Americans don't like his personality and the way that he goes about conducting himself. But in the final analysis, more people cared about the policies than they cared about the personality. And in my view, he had probably, the weakest opponent in decades that he had to run against, who frankly didn't have a whole lot of time to put their campaign together to begin with. But
I mean, all the presidents you worked for and mentioned, regardless of their policies, they tried to be conciliatory towards all Americans. Frickin' Reagan, I didn't like his policies, but he was a comforting presence in the White House. Even though he pissed me off frequently, he spoke kindly.
Absolutely, positively. And, he was like grandfatherly, I mean, he was an excellent communicator. He worked on a bipartisan basis. He had, you also have to keep in mind he had to, right? The Democrats control the House and the Senate. So he had to work on a bipartisan basis, or he never would have gotten anything done. And, many things have been written about the, very positive and constructive relationship that he had with Tip O'Neill, that they might fight during the daytime, but then they'd have a good Irishman would have a drink, have a drink late in the afternoon or early in the evening. And, they got along well as human beings.
So George W. Bush had the highest approval of any president in history because of 9/11. After 9/11, he said the country needs to pull together. We did behind him. He had, for a little while, he had 95% approval. Now, I think he wasted it on some stuff, and his approval certainly didn't hold up that high, as for long. But he reached out to an entire American population who'd been so deeply grieved and wounded by 9/11.
Well, then his dad, George H.W. Bush, who I had a presidential appointment from, had popularity ratings of over 90% after the Gulf War, but he didn't get reelected because the people wanted change, and he wasn't focused enough on domestic issues. He was focused more on foreign policy issues, and Bill Clinton came along and took advantage of that. And as I said, I think by and large did a very good job as president.
Hey, David, just really quickly along those same lines, because we had here in North Carolina our governor, newly appointed governor, do his state of the state address and everything. And it seemed like he was doing what Rick is alluding to, because he has the same situation. It's a Republican controlled supermajority and everything. And it seemed like his speech was trying to allude to the or pitch to the center, because he was talking about things that both parties should be able to get behind, like hurricane relief and other programs that are going to be beneficial to both parties. So is that something that we need to see more of, people going toward the center? Because that's what it seems like he was trying to do, is pitch toward the center.
Yeah, here's the problem, Mark. Okay, I mean, today, the latest data that I've seen, slightly over half of all registered voters of the United States are unaffiliated or independent, and I'm one of them. And both parties are losing market share. At the same point in time, when you look at Congress, there are very few independents or unaffiliated people in Congress, less than a handful. And then if you look at how people characterize themselves from an ideological standpoint, 60% plus of the is in what I would call the sensible center right, center left. And yet when you look at Congress, okay, who are actually the elected representatives, if you will, because we have a republic, not a direct democracy, the center has virtually evaporated. There's very little center. In the House, for example, there's something called the Blue Dog Democrats. It used to be a pretty sizable caucus. Those were, moderate Democrats. They're a small fraction of what they were 20 years ago. On the Republican side, there was the Main Street Coalition, which were the moderate Republicans. Both those things still exist, but they're a small fraction of what they used to be 20 years ago. And part of that comes back to, the need for political reforms, the need for redistricting reform, the need for integrated open primaries, the need for campaign finance reform, the need for term limits, and a variety of other things in order to be able to revitalize our democracy and create a republic that's more representative of and responsive to the general public.
We have our governor, Newsom, is trying to move to the center because he's positioning himself for a run. And he has a podcast, and he's had huge conservatives on. He's had Steve Bannon on, hated by liberals. Charlie Kirk, head of TPUSA, a huge conservative pundit, and obviously he's been working with his people to see who he could throw under the bus to signal to conservatives that he's listening to them. And he decided trans athletes, that there aren't that many of them, and we're going to F them over. And he's going to say, yeah, I don't approve of trans athletes in sports. And that's a huge signal to try to grab conservatives at the expense of very few trans athletes.
Rick, one quick thing. I know Jacoby's got his hand up. We'll go to him next. But, he can try all he wants. He will fail because he's got a record, and his record is not good. So,
I know we've had two presidents come out of California. We've had Reagan and Nixon.
Yeah.
And it doesn't necessarily brand you. I know he's got 3 years to turn it around.
Yeah, but understand, Rick, the California under Reagan and Nixon is a very different California today. Okay, and their records were very different than Gavin Newsom's. But we'll see. I think the Democrats, quite frankly, they need a governor, but there are a number of other governors I think that have proven that they can win in either red or purple states. And two examples that I'll just give you off the top are the governors of Pennsylvania and Kentucky. I think they're much more viable candidates if the Democrats want to be competitive in 2028. Jacoby?
Yeah, I think the problem that Newsom did when he tried to platform those two individuals, both have really a very bad history, Charlie Kirk especially, from the things that he said and the things that he's done. Same thing with Steve Bannon, but I think that pushed a lot of people away from Gavin Newsom, especially in the Democrat Party. And it didn't really even help him with the conservatives because the conservatives don't really like Steve Bannon, and Charlie Kirk is an extreme. So that's really far. And I completely agree with you, Dave. Right now, I think Shapiro is honestly the best one that could come out of the Democrat Party because not only is he, in a state that is a swing state and he can win there, but also he actually is a good speaker. So that is something that the Democrat Party desperately needs, someone who can actually push an agenda and actually get that message across.
Yeah. Can I mention real quick, Jacoby, on that? I agree with you. Let me give you an analogy, okay? Liz Cheney. Liz Cheney, her political career is over, okay? No matter what you think of Liz Cheney, the Democrats liked her because she was anti-Trump. The Republicans, rejected her when she ran for re-election in Wyoming. I think Newsom's making a similar mistake. The conservatives are never going to vote for Newsom, okay? And yet, with him doing what he's doing, he's alienating, a number of members of his own party.
And Dave, to touch even on the Liz Cheney thing even more, I think what Kamala Harris did in terms of her outreach, in terms of the conservatives and the moderate conservatives, I think that honestly wasn't going to deter a lot of the base because they gave her a lot of leeway, one, but the conservatives that she grabbed really weren't, your Charlie Kirk, Steve Bannons, and all these really extremists.
They were moderates, and there still are some moderates in the party. Yeah.
And in all honesty, Liz Cheney, even though her father was, the bane of the existence of every Democrat, Liz Cheney didn't reach that yet. And you could actually sell a Liz Cheney as a moderate Republican, especially.
There's no question. I mean, her dad was a true conservative. There's no question about that. And so I had to sue him. I sued her when I was Controller General.
Really?
Okay, he needs to.
So I want to bring up a few things because I was at Sierra Week last week, and that was phenomenal. A little embarrassing in the beginning. I heard this word many, many times, uncertainty. So many times in some of the sessions, it was beginning to get annoying. But I want to bring, some positive things. Is I bumped into former ambassador Frances Scott. She is just fabulous. And it was nice to see her again. And she was introducing to us a gentleman who has been very innovative in nuclear power energy, which is really still got a solid ground in the world. And, we need to take a look at some of these things, because energy is going to be, our big up and coming thing that we need to be focused on, depending on which direction we go, and you have Trump pushing pump more gas, pump more gas. Well, a lot of the world has gone that route. Many of the countries I have watched now become more independent in those areas and investing more in that. One of the things that caught my interest was copper becoming the biggest, most needed mineral in the world. And Canada is ahead of the curve on that. And they're investing more and more in their country and in their people to do that. But when we're talking about all of this, and how does all of this, the ripple effect, impact the economy? I think, what General Randall Reed said was very impactful, which he's the one who pointed out we're saying this word too much, uncertainty. Is our decisions need to think about the human and the impacts. We need to think more and more about how this is going to impact the humans. And he couldn't have said it at a better time, because so many people were just on edge last week. It was uncomfortable. The first 2 days were very uncomfortable. After a while, people started warming up and being the same old people that we've known for years, because we're just gathered from all over the world. But when I look at this, and Canada has just obtained a new leader who is brilliant in finance, and his wife is, I think, even more brilliant than he is in finance. I think that they're going to put an end to this tariff nonsense, bad negotiating, war, whatever it is, games. And, he's thrown in their lap, okay, fine, we'll just cancel our contract with Lockheed. And, that's $13 billion in buying, F-35s from you, F-35s. So, that was a huge kick. If I were Lockheed, I'd pack up and move to Canada. But I think he's smart enough to deal with Trump. And I think you're going to see Trump, starting to rant and rage, and like he always does, find an insult and a nickname for him, because when he doesn't like someone and he's not smarter than them, that's what you're going to see. He's a bully. But when we get down and boil all this down to the tariffs, all the massive layoffs or firing, and when you do massive firing of middle class income like this, you impact 7 jobs in the community. Per hiring, per firing, 7 jobs. So each person, kind of helps 7 other people. That's hurting our economy really bad. On top of, the prices keep going up, the stock market keeps going down. I think it had a little bit of a reprieve the other day, but our economy is not in our favor. And I wonder if everything Trump is doing, it's been to his benefit and retribution, because like Canada closed his hotel in Canada a few years back. It just didn't make it. And maybe he's just still angry because, he carries hate towards people for a long time. So I'm wondering if some of this is just retribution towards Canada, like he does for everyone else. What do you think?
You would hope not. I mean, the fact of the matter is that the biggest uncertainty, I'm sorry to use the word, but I will. Okay.
No, that's okay.
The biggest uncertainty is his trade policy. And it needs to be clear. It needs to be more consistent. It's one thing to talk about reciprocity, that if you want to end up, imposing a 10% tariff on importing our cars, we're going to impose a 10% tariff on the cars you bring here. I mean, that's one thing. But a lot of these things that he's talking about are not reciprocity. The last thing in the world you want is a trade war. There's no winners in a trade war. And so hopefully this thing's going to settle out. But basically what Trump is focused on the most, other than tariffs, which has got to get straightened up, is he wants tax relief, he wants regulatory relief, he wants more energy production. That's what he's counting on, in order to be able to stoke the economy and to try to keep prices under control. And only time will tell. Rick, I think you've had your hand up next.
So 2 weeks ago, eggs were $8 a dozen. Now they're $4. I don't know if that's because of Trump or what happened, but that's a huge change. Now, I have some numbers about Teslas. Teslas use 400 pounds of aluminum per car, 180 pounds of copper, 138 pounds of lithium, 18 pounds of cobalt. So I don't know if Tesla will remain the market leader but I assume those numbers are pretty common for any electric car. What we need is we need to figure out how to recycle our metals. So we're not just digging fresh metal out of the ground, but we're also mining our garbage for a lot of these metals, which I think AI could do that. Digger robots who are sorting metals out of dumps, out of trash trucks.
Good point. Jacoby, you're muted.
So I think the issue with Trump on his tariffs is the fact that he's so indecisive, hate to use the term again, on putting them on, take them off, put them on, take them off, put them on, take them off. And that has caused such an issue. But in terms of the aluminum and everything else, yes, that's a huge thing because honestly, the big battle is energy. And we are way behind on that. And it's not oil and gas production. That is old technology. The new technologies that are out there, because the energy production is huge because of AI. AI uses such an enormous amount of power and water, and aluminum, copper, and other minerals are utilized in that power production. Yes, Tesla and the batteries and stuff like that for cars is one thing. However, I think it's BYD that's taken over in the Chinese market for Tesla right now. That took over 2-3 years ago. So they aren't the biggest producer of cars in the China market. It's actually a Chinese company that's doing that now. But in terms of the actual energy across the globe, that is where AI is. That's why Google, Microsoft, Apple have all bought up the old nuclear plants to create that extra power. Because again, if you're going to lead in technology, you've got to lead in AI. Tesla's not in AI. What Elon Musk is doing is his big deal with Modi in India when he met with Modi first and actually sold Starlink to India. So that's what Elon Musk is, and that's all corruption, which is horrible, and which is why we need more oversight. But we're not going to get it with this, with what's going on now. But yeah, the energy market, it's huge.
Yeah. David, I was just going to go over just briefly something that you said in an earlier program, that the USA has no plan, which I think is very important because years and years ago, when I was in my MBA program, when I was like 19 years old, there was a concept called management by objective. Okay, and management by objective means that you create a objective and you move toward the objective. One simple objective would be to balance the budget, okay, which balancing the budget by lowering expenses and increasing revenues. However, this, draining the swamp, is not an objective. So when you're managing by objective, you're not engaged in middle school rhetoric, which is draining the swamp. Draining the swamp means nothing to anybody. But I believe if Donald Trump and his administration would create an objective, something so simple that Clinton did and Richard Nixon did, manage it by balancing the budget and then head toward that. And we know that that would be difficult, maybe even impossible to occur, but at least we have an objective. But right now I see the administration that doesn't have any plan and has no objectives. Yes, David.
Several things. Number one, the president has said that he wants to balance the budget within 3 years. That's not a credible objective, because if you look at the proposed budget package, as I said before, it makes things worse as compared to the current law rather than better. Okay. But here's what's key. And this is something I'm working on. You know that I'm an advocate for a fiscal sustainability commission. You know, I'm an advocate for a fiscal responsibility constitutional amendment. And I continue to be on those cases. But I'm also an advocate for a more strategic and transformational approach to right-sizing government. And I'm working right now on a strategic framework that would basically consider, what is the government doing versus what the founders intended? What's being done by the federal government that theoretically should be done by state and local? Mm-hmm. What are the departments and agencies doing as compared to the laws that created them? Because there's a lot of mission creep. What are we trying to accomplish, from an economic, from a foreign policy, from military, from a domestic standpoint? What are we trying to accomplish? How do we measure success? So I'm starting to pull together a whole range of what I would call key national indicators, which are outcome-based performance indicators. Okay. And I'm going to try to be working with several people to try to be able to get this done, because without that, you're flying blind and growing mountains of debt without an instrument panel, and we are in rough shape. So let me go to you, Nick, and you can moderate here.
Okay. Well, we'll go Kim, Jacoby, Rick, and Mark.
Thank you again. David, you're right. We need to start outlining some key point indicators and what is most important. The problem, that we did right now is, he wanted to show he can accomplish a lot real quick, or maybe he had other things that he wanted to cover up. So he just, crashes the China house all at one time and everyone's picking up pieces. But you can't go in and just cut everything. And just because you accomplished something doesn't mean it was good. And I don't think they're looking at that. And I don't think Elon or Trump were the right people to do this. They may have been able to talk well and tell you what you wanted to hear. Anyone can read a policy. But, I'm thinking now, somebody needs to write Trump a script for running the country, because, he's only used to reality TV shows, and he screws up. He could either file bankruptcy or start over the next day, but nobody was hurt. In real life, millions of people are getting hurt. In real life, it's embarrassing for me to go to another country and say I'm an American, because he has done so many horrible things, and you might think they're good, but they're not. But example, Guantanamo Bay, where they were supposed, right? Guantanamo Bay. Thank you. I can't pronounce some of these words.
Gitmo. Just go Gitmo.
Gitmo Bay. Okay, so anyway, Gitmo. They were supposed to be housing the immigrants there, which is wrong, but they only have 40 there, and they've spent $16 million to house 40 people. Nick, I asked you this question earlier. How much were they spending on the hotel to house how many migrants in New York? This seems ridiculous to me, but I think that he's throwing away money. They asked for $1.6 trillion to operate with until September. What are they spending that money on? And how much money did Trump spend lobbying to bring back 2 sex traffickers from Romania? How much money did they spend of our tax dollars to bring those 2 horrific men back here, and why?
Just to put some context, the 1.6 trillion is for the entire fiscal year, of which we're almost we're halfway through it already. Okay, the 1.6 trillion compares to 1.59 trillion last year, so it's basically a flat budget, a flat set of appropriations. And we'll see how they end up using Gitmo. Hopefully they'll use it more going forward, but we'll see. Rick?
Yeah, so the U.S. is not a nimble country. A couple times in recent history, the U.S. has been able to turn on a dime, unify, and push. The biggest push was World War II. We manufactured a ton of stuff super fast as we entered the war. And then we had another pretty decent push when we freaked out about Sputnik in 57 and we turned our education system around. Now we've got terrible trust in government, and you look at the countries that are nimble. I'm looking at Estonia tries all sorts of new crazy experiments because the people there trust their government. 75% of Estonians trust administrative services. 65% trust their education system. 67% trust healthcare. Our trust is half of that. So I don't know how we get the trust back.
Oh, just so you know, we go to Jatovi next, but just so you know, trust in government is one of the key national indicators. So let's one of many.
Yeah, Jatovi.
Yeah.
So they do actually have a plan, but the plan isn't what we hoped for. It's what they're selling you that we're falling for. With Guantanamo Bay, that's just a big show. Everything dealing with immigration is just a big show. How do you know it's a big show? They put Dr. Phil on ride-alongs to videotape and actually do these whole cops variations of that. That's just a distraction. Honestly, if you look at the immigration numbers, yes, immigration numbers are down, but they were going down under Biden. And when Trump took over, they were already down. And then in terms of deporting people, Biden at this time had deported more people than Trump did. So the actual numbers aren't there. The showcase is there. They're just actually going in. For example, they are now deporting a Lebanese doctor. That just happened over the weekend. They're trying to deport a Lebanese doctor, and the court stepped in and said that you can't do that, but he's still actually going through with it. But on top of that, he's still blasting out a whole bunch of stuff that is a distraction. If you take a look at what the actual plan is, for example, when they came in and fired all these people, who did he fire? He fired the FDA. Why did he fire the FDA? No, it wasn't because they were doing a bad job. FDA was looking into Neuralink. You know who owns Neuralink? Elon Musk. He fired a bunch of people, the inspectors general, that were actually looking into SpaceX, to looking into Tesla. All these individuals that were going around these companies that were being investigated, that gave money to. For example, when Trump did the whole let me sell Tesla cars on the White House lawn, which is illegal, Elon Musk donated a whole $100 million to Donald Trump. So that right there should tell us where the actual plan is. And then I think, Nick, you had brought it up one time when you're talking about Google not having to sell off Chrome. Well, you know what? That was being inspected before there was a lawsuit there that they were going after Google to sell off Chrome. Well, you know what happened? They gave money to Donald Trump. Now what? This transactional thing is what's there. All this clouded stuff is just used to do just that, cloud the actual realities that are going on that we should really pay attention to. All this government corruption and the thing, we can't trust Doge. Doge put up numbers that were of contracts that were actually closed before they got into office. Doge is giving, it's 8 billion. No, it's actually 8 million. You just miscounted. So you can't trust that. It's just a show to cover up all the different things that they're actually cutting that affect people like Elon Musk.
Yeah. Sasha?
Oh, okay. I am of the opinion that Trump and Musk and their assistants, they got just a little bit too much at the same time on their plates. Okay, you can do one thing well, then okay, once you've done it or even half done, then you try next one or so on. They've done all many initiatives in all directions simultaneously, and that even some people agree with one of them, or half of the people agree, but then most of the people would disagree with another one, and that would hurt one that maybe is not doing so badly. For example, let's talk about tariffs. Tariffs, it's interesting to announce that on Wednesday, Canada imposed on US 25% tariffs on, I think the list is about 150, if not over, different goods, such as live poultry, including chicken, ducks, geese, turkeys, guinea fowl, pig fat, free of lean meat and poultry meat, milk and cream, including yogurt, buttermilk, and so on, cheese and curd, eggs, natural honey, tomatoes, fresh or chilled, fruits and nuts, fresh or dried, whether or sun dried, citrus fruits, melons, apricots, coffee, tea, pepper, vanilla, seeds. I can read it on. It's 150 items, and I'm not going to do that. And interestingly enough, that next day, it was on Wednesday last week. On Thursday, Canadian delegation came over to U.S. to meet U.S. representatives, and you know what they said? They said, well, look, our Canadian friends, we are going to put tariffs of all countries around the world, all of them, no exception. Then those who will be nice to us, we will start lower these tariffs, and in some cases maybe even will remove it. Now, those who are going to fight us, we are going to bury. They will disappear. Now, it remains Canada did not remove these tariffs. They're still on. There are no plans to remove it. And actually, European Union starts new tariffs on U.S. on April 1st, although U.S. starts on April 2nd. So European Union wants to be first on April 1st, and Canada will impose a lot of new tariffs also on April 1st. So what's the end game, David? What do you think?
Well, first, April 1st is April Fool's Day, so we'll see.
It's okay. Fools will have their fun with tariffs.
We'll see what actually happens on
Yeah.
April 1st. Okay, but anyway, look, to me, the strongest intellectual framework for tariffs is reciprocity.
Mhm.
We will treat you like you treat us. The objective should be few tariffs. We want free and fair trade, and to the extent that there are going to be tariffs, they should only be to try to deal with inequities where it's not free and fair trade. And it should be targeted and hopefully temporary. That's my opinion, okay? Right now, it's really not clear what the administration is trying to do, and it goes way beyond reciprocity, all right, which has some intellectual merit. As I said, that's the area that I probably have the biggest concern right now from an economic standpoint is what's going on with regard to the tariff talk.
David, may I ask you something? You have to understand, for example, the Trump's grievances about, for example, timber from Canada. So they are saying that timber is subsidized, it's unfair trade, or so on. But you have to look a little bit deeper than that. Timber and all forests are owned in Canada by Crown, King Charles or Victoria or whoever they are. They own all forests in Canada. So therefore, the forest is very accessible. Canadians can get as much forest as they need and more. Now, unlike in Canada, US, it's owned privately by greedy American capitalists. So they want to get a lot of money for their forests. And then it creates absolutely inconceivable picture where US forests simply cannot, by design of economic system, compete with Canadian forest product. It's just a given fact. Learn to accept it and learn to live with that, and no tariffs will cure that little problem.
Actually, as you know, about 20% of the United States is also owned by the federal government. But go ahead. Yeah. Who's next?
I think I was next and everything. One, I'm just going to say that Stella had a comment for you, and Stella is one of our fellow anchors and everything along those lines. So Stella does a show called Doing Justice Brings Joy, because she is a justice advocate and does a lot of work around housing and everything. So she asked if you looked into the impact of immigration show on agriculture in Nebraska, where 60% of the workforce has voluntarily deported themselves or left Nebraska. So apparently they are.
Let me comment on that real quick. Okay. Yes. It's really outrageous that we have not engaged in comprehensive immigration reform in so many decades. You've probably seen in the news about the controversy over Trump, sending, criminal illegal migrants to El Salvador in the face of a judge who said you can't do that. And there's a debate about whether they were already outside of U.S. airspace. And Trump said he's using an act from the 1700s in order to justify. Here's the bottom line. We need to secure the border, and we're taking steps to do that. But we desperately need comprehensive immigration reform that does several things. One, it recognizes that there are certain segments of our economy, and that we need and rely on immigrants to be able to do the work. And the biggest example is agriculture. Absolutely no question whatsoever. It's not the only example, it's the biggest example. And so we ought to be providing for temporary work permits, for people to be able to come in this country, to be able to work the fields. You can say the same thing with regard to, in the summertime, with regard to, cutting lawns and doing all kinds of other things, if you will. We need to provide much more of that, because a lot of those people want to come in for a period of time and then go home. Okay. Right. Secondly, we also need to separate between a pathway to permanent legal status, which is a green card, from a pathway to citizenship. If you want citizenship, you need to do everything legally. Okay. And I think you also need to be able to do something above and beyond as well. And so we need to rationalize. It's desperately needed. And I think ultimately will be accomplished, but it can't be accomplished until after the border's secure.
Just really quickly, because I know we're wrapping up and everything. The other question that I was going to ask really quickly is, you talked about targeted goals. Do we have a system for putting those targeted goals in? Because one of the things I remembered about welfare to workfare was that there was a targeted period of time that people were going to move from that was placed in. I don't know that it was ever effectively implemented, but it was planned to work that way when Clinton created that idea of moving people away from welfare into this notion of actually working for the benefits that you got, which was working.
Yeah, it was called workfare. Yeah, there was a transition period, right? In other words, here's where we are, here's where we want to be, right. Here's how much time you have to get there, right? I mean, you have to keep in mind, you don't want to create a permanent dependency on government for people who otherwise are able-bodied, okay? If you're not able-bodied, that's a different situation, okay? But if you are able-bodied, you want to provide an incentive for them to be productive in society, which, quite frankly, it's not just from an economic standpoint, it's from a personal health and well-being standpoint. I've had some of those conversations, I won't mention with whom, where people who were not working, who should be working, including some in my family. And I've said that, this is something you need to do for your personal health and well-being. It's not just an economic issue. And I'm pleased to say they're doing it.
And with that, we're going to be transforming over to our next show. We want to thank the Honorable David M. Walker, former Comptroller General of the United States, and our panelists in the United States and around the world. We'll see you next week on Economics with the Honorable David M. Walker.